Five friends decided they needed to blow off some steam and get away from the big city. They decided they needed to connect with nature, so they drove to a cabin that was secluded and deep in the woods. They went in this cabin, and when they went in one room, that's when their horrors really began. But before we dive into this horror, if you get an invite to the Like Button's housewarming party, don't go to Bed Bath & Beyond to get them a gift. Instead, go to the Warren's Occult Museum and grab a nice shiny cursed object, drop it off at the door, and run. So these five friends are driving their 1974 Oldsmobile Delta 88 through the woods, and they go across this really old, narrow bridge that's literally falling apart when they drive over it. They travel this road that is barely even a road until they finally arrive at this cabin. Scott, Linda, Shelly, Cheryl, and Ash, they're all so excited because they finally get to sit back, relax, and just have a great time this weekend, avoiding the stresses of their everyday lives. Later that night, everyone is sitting at the table eating dinner when a trapdoor in the living room just flies open. They all look at each other because none of them noticed this trapdoor before. Scott and Ash tell the girls to stay there while they go check it out. You see, Scott and Ash were two young men who wanted to protect these girls and impress them. Scott was dating Shelly and Ash was dating Linda. Cheryl was Ash's sister. When they got over to the trapdoor, they saw it was a set of stairs that led to the basement of this cabin. They proceeded down the stairs to investigate why this trapdoor swung open. Little did they know that going down those stairs would change their lives forever. There wasn't a whole lot down there. It was dirty and had lots of random stuff covered in dust and cobwebs. But there were three things that literally caught the attention of the boys. So they grabbed those three things and they brought them upstairs. There was this really cool looking dagger that had these intricate designs and skulls on it. And they also had a weird and mysterious looking book. And the last item that they brought with them was a tape recorder. Shortly after this, Cheryl would go for a walk outside. And when she came back to the cabin, she was screaming and she was covered in bruises and cuts all over her whole body. Ash couldn't believe his eyes. And he was like, "Are you okay? What happened to you? What did this to you?" But Cheryl, all she could say was it was a forest attacking her. And the trees did this. Everyone in the group just looked confused at each other because Cheryl sounded crazy. I mean, they knew there was no way the forest and trees attacked Cheryl and did all of this to her, but they also knew Cheryl, and she wasn't someone who would do this to herself. Ash decided he was going to get Cheryl out of there. So they both got in the car, and Ash drove down that narrow, overgrown path, but when they got back to that old bridge, now it was completely broken down, and they couldn't pass over it. So they just drove back to the cabin. They get back to the cabin where Shelly and Linda are playing cards. They're playing a game where Linda's pulling a card and Shelly has to try and guess what this card is. Linda's doing horrible and getting every card wrong. But the girls are laughing and they're having a good time until Cheryl, who's looking out the window, starts guessing the cards as well, and she's getting every single card right. One after another, after another, after another. Cheryl jumps up from where she was sitting and her eyes are rolled in the back of her head. And she starts speaking in this demonic voice. She starts saying, "One by one we take you." Cheryl grabs a pencil and stabs Linda right in the ankle, twisting it all around in the process. She starts trying to attack the others, but Scott grabs the butt end of an axe and hits her right in the face, knocking her back, and kicks her down the stairs in the trap door. He hurries up, he jumps on top of this door and uses a chain to keep this door tied down, but it still lifts just enough that Cheryl can peek out at the others. So everybody's freaking out because they don't really understand what just happened. Cheryl was fine 1 second, and then she seemed possessed the next. Ash picked up Linda and carried her into their bedroom, placing her in the bed to rest after the vicious attack on her ankle. Shelly was with Scott and freaking out because she couldn't really handle what had just happened and couldn't stop talking about Cheryl's eyes. Scott lets her know everything is going to be okay and takes her to the bedroom so she can try and relax about everything that just happened. A little while later, Scott went back to the bedroom to check on Shelly, but couldn't find her anywhere. Until she jumps out And she literally starts attacking him, just scratching and clawing at his face and riding on him like frantically as he goes out into the living room. She was now acting as if she was possessed the same as Cheryl, and her eyes were rolled into the back of her head so you could only see the whites. Scott eventually throws Shelly off of him, and then she grabs that really cool looking dagger Scott had found earlier, and she tried stabbing him with it. So Scott was able to block her attack, and he grabbed the knife he had on him, and he ends up cutting Shelly's hand clean off. So Scott picks up that dagger that still had Shelly's hand attached to it and stabs Shelly in the back with it. Shelly would fall to the ground, and Scott and Ash assumed everything was over until Cheryl starts screaming to Shelly from that crack in the basement door, and Shelly would get up. However, Scott would grab that axe again, and he attacked Shelly, hitting her over and over and over again until he dismembered her entire body. To understand why Scott did this, we have to go back to when those boys brought those 3 items up from the basement. So when they got upstairs, Scott thought it would be fun to play this tape recorder. They would hear the voice of an archaeologist, Raymond Noby. He was explaining that this dagger he had found was a Kandarian dagger, and also he explained that the book that they had found was known as the Book of the Dead. It was bound in human flesh and inked with human blood. Then Raymond started reading an incantation from the book. And later, when Cheryl was possessed and in the basement, Ash listened to more of this recording. Here he would find out the same thing happened to Raymond's wife, and she became possessed by a Kandarian demon. And then he would say the only way to defeat this demon was to dismember the body of the person it possessed. So the boys would take Shelly's chopped up body in a sheet outside and bury it. When they finished, Scott turned to Ash and said, "This is too much. I can't take it anymore. I need to get out of here." But Ash tells him they can't just leave. Linda is too hurt to be able to get out of here. She can't walk. And then Scott says in a panic, "I don't care about Linda. I need to get out of here." And Scott would just take off running in the woods to try to get away. And then Ash, he just went back in the cabin because he wanted to check on his girlfriend. And when he went in the cabin to the bedroom, he saw Linda laying asleep on the bed. And when he looked at her wound, he saw it was now black all around it. And there was this like spider webbing pattern coming from it. So Ash was terrified that it was infected now. And then Linda would sit up. And now her eyes were in the back of her head as well. And all she started doing was just laughing. So right after this, Scott would come barging back into the house. His leg was cut very deeply, and he had this large gash in the side of his face. And Scott tells Ash, "You need to kill Linda." Ash grabs a shotgun and points it directly at Linda's face when all of a sudden, Linda was looking and acting like herself. She wasn't appearing to be possessed anymore. She was sad and crying. Ash couldn't help himself because he loved his girlfriend so much that he hugged her and he held her so tightly. Then his sister Cheryl was talking to him too. She also looked not to be possessed anymore. She was begging him, "Ash, I'm scared, but I'm all better now. Can you please get me out of this basement?" So Ash, he jumped right to the floor to get over to his sister to remove those chains over the trap door. But when he got to the floor, 2 hands came ripping up through the floor trying to grab him. Ash got himself free from those hands, and he looks at his sister and at his girlfriend, and they're back to being possessed with their eyes in the back of their heads. Linda just starts creepily singing, "We're gonna get you, we're gonna get you." Ash grabs Linda by her feet and drags her outside. He runs back over to Scott to check on him, but Scott is unresponsive, as he is now dead due to the severity of his wounds. Linda runs back inside, and she grabs that Kandarian dagger, stabbing Ash in the shoulder. Ash was fighting back and forth with Linda until he pushed her over and she fell over Scott's dead body and impaled herself on this Kandarian dagger. Ash would pick up Linda's body and take it out to a nearby shed, and he placed her on a workbench. He grabbed a chainsaw, but he couldn't bring himself to dismember his girlfriend's body. So Ash takes her outside and digs a grave, and he puts her in it to give her a proper burial. Once buried, Linda actually escapes from this grave and attacks Ash again. Ash grabs his shovel in self-defense and just swings it at his girlfriend, decapitating her. Ash would then go back to the cabin, and to his surprise, the trapdoor to the cellar was now open, and then Cheryl would come attacking him through a window, and Ash would shoot her in the face with a shotgun. and then he ran down to the basement to get more shells for this shotgun. When he came back up, he was starting to get overtaken by all the stress he had endured to this point. He looked at a clock and the hands are just spinning nonstop. Then he sees a mirror and it looks like it's running water, so he sticks his hand through this running water mirror. Ash was thinking to himself, what am I going to do? Am I going crazy too now? And Ash leaned up against that cabin door, just waiting out this horror. And Cheryl's hands would come busting through the cabin door, grabbing Ash. And when he got free, he pointed that shotgun back through one of those holes and shot her in the face again. Scott would then sit up and he would attack Ash from behind. In this tussle, they ended up knocking the corner of that book into the fire. As it started to burn, so did Scott. So Ash finally found another way to take down these demons because they were somehow tied to this book. Cheryl breaks down the cabin door and starts attacking Ash. She ends up beating him in the back with a fire poker. Ash would use a necklace to grab onto the book and pull it closer to him. He then grabbed the book and he threw it into the fire. The book would catch on fire and started to really, really burn this time, and it ended up burning the bodies of Scott and Cheryl, and they would start to liquefy into puddles of blood and mush. So Ash ends up getting up the next morning, and he walks out of the cabin knowing he would never be the same again, as he watched and or murdered all of his closest friends and sister that night. Remember, if the like button invites you to their housewarming party, go to the Warrens Occult Museum, grab a cursed object, drop it off at their house, and run. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror content in a narrative true crime form. And if you find yourself come across a tape recorder, don't just turn it on so you can rest in peace.